What was life like for women in the Middle Ages? In one word, restricted. Medieval women were limited by harsh laws, unbending social rules, and strict religious expectations. While history remembers their male counterparts as fierce warriors, cunning leaders, and pioneering thinkers, the contributions of medieval women are often overlooked. And that's not because they weren't contributing members of society, it's because men didn't want them to be recognized. Today we look at what medieval women were not allowed to do. And don't forget to stay tuned for more videos about strong and inspiring women throughout history. Read books. We think it's normal for kids to go to school and learn how to read. But in the Middle Ages, this was not always the case, especially for girls. Most medieval women did not have access to education. This was partly because books were expensive and rare, so schools couldn't afford them. Girls were also expected to focus on learning domestic skills like cooking, cleaning, and sewing instead of reading and writing. Even if a girl's family wanted her to be educated, there were few options. There were some special schools for girls, but most of them focused on religion. These schools taught girls how to read the Bible and other religious texts so they could become good wives and mothers. However, these schools were the exception rather than the rule. For most medieval girls, their education ended after a few years of basic instruction at home from their parents or older siblings. They were taught essential skills for everyday life and helping the family, but formal education was reserved for boys. Speak in public. Being quiet is something that we associate with children, not adults. However, in medieval times, adult women were expected to be silent. Men believed that women's voices were too weak and their presence in public distracted people. Women were generally forbidden to speak in public, especially in religious places like churches. If a woman had something to say, she could ask a male relative to speak for her. Even if a woman wasn't talking, just being outside the home was risky. If a woman's beauty attracted a man, and he thought she was flirting, she could be accused of being a witch. Own property. Under medieval law, women couldn't own property. When a woman married, any property she owned became her husband's. This meant that women couldn't make decisions about money or land without a man's permission. Men saw this as necessary to keep women under their control. This law also applied to earnings from work. A woman's salary belonged to her husband, even if she was supporting her entire family with her job. Even if a woman had no husband, such as a widow, she still couldn't own property. Her deceased husband's family would take all of his possessions, including land and money. This made many widows poor and dependent on others for help. However, there were some exceptions to this rule. In some cases, a woman could own property if she had no husband. This was usually because of special permission from the king or a powerful church leader. Also, women could own property if they were nuns. Nuns lived separate lives from regular medieval women. They dedicated their lives to God and followed the teachings of the church. Despite not being allowed to own property in general, they were allowed to hold and manage property belonging to the church. This was because the church viewed them as holy and trustworthy. Have an occupation. The restrictions placed on medieval women extended beyond their right to own property. They were also not permitted to engage in most occupations. Instead, they were expected to focus on domestic roles within the household. This limitation was primarily due to the prevailing notion that women were less capable than men in matters related to money and business. However, despite these restrictions, women did participate in the workforce, although their roles were limited. For example, women were employed in agriculture, often working alongside their husbands and families in farming and related activities. They were also involved in industries like weaving and making candles. Additionally, women played a significant role in trade, frequently assisting their husbands in managing their stalls and shops. Many women also ran businesses as innkeepers or tavern owners. Some women were even involved in fishing, particularly in coastal communities where they might own boats and hire crews to fish. Get a divorce. The medieval period had different rules when it came to getting a divorce. Unlike today, a divorce wasn't easy to get. It was very difficult for either men or women to end a marriage. If a woman wanted a divorce, she had to prove that her husband was abusive or had done something wrong, like having an affair. Even then, a divorce was not guaranteed. The rules varied depending on where you were in Europe. Some places made it easier for men to get a divorce, while others made it more difficult. England and France were among the strictest when it came to granting divorces to women. Other places like Italy and Spain were a bit more lenient. Go anywhere alone. In medieval Europe, women were not permitted to travel alone. Male relatives were responsible for ensuring their safety and had to accompany them on journeys. This restriction applied to all women, regardless of their social status. A woman's reputation was crucial in medieval society, and any sign of independence could tarnish that reputation. Traveling alone was seen as too risky. Unmarried women who went out alone could be judged for acting inappropriately. Married women weren't allowed to travel alone either. Doing so would put them in danger and reflect badly on their husbands and families. Be a judge. During the medieval era, the legal system severely restricted the participation of women. In most jurisdictions, women were prohibited from serving as judges, a profession predominantly reserved for men. This exclusion stemmed from the patriarchal nature of the time, which relegated women to domestic roles. Legal proceedings were heavily influenced by religious norms and societal expectations, often treating women as subordinate to men. Their exclusion from the judiciary reinforced gender roles and limited women's access to positions of power. Heal the sick. During the medieval period, the role of healers was largely confined to men, while women were mostly relegated to domestic roles. This gender division in healthcare was deeply rooted in societal norms and religious beliefs. Men were seen as rational and detached, qualities deemed essential for diagnosing illnesses. Women, on the other hand, were viewed as emotional and nurturing, traits considered more suitable for domestic caregiving. As a result, women's experiences and knowledge of healing through childbirth and traditional remedies were often disregarded or undervalued. Join the clergy. In medieval Europe, women were not allowed to become priests or hold other positions in the clergy. This exclusion was based on the belief that women were too emotional and weak to handle the spiritual duties of the church. Men were seen as better suited for religious roles because they were considered more rational and strong. Additionally, the Bible supported this exclusion as it had passages that stated women should remain silent in church. Despite these restrictions, some women did become influential in the church, like Hildegard von Bingen, who was a writer, composer, and philosopher. She became the first woman doctor in the church, travel by air. Back in the 18th century, the Wright brothers hadn't invented airplanes yet, so the only way to fly was by using hot air balloons. But you won't believe us when we tell you that a woman named Anne-Sophie de la Flotte was the first person in the world to fly a hot air balloon. She achieved this incredible feat in 1783 in France, around 2 years before the Montgolfier brothers made their famous hot air balloon flight. The French military officer and balloonist Charles de Borda helped her prepare the balloon, and they both signed an agreement stating that neither of them would reveal the other's role in the flight. Because women weren't allowed to travel alone, her brother accompanied her on the journey, and this fact led to speculation that he was the one who actually piloted the aircraft. But this isn't true. Unfortunately, the story remained hidden for many years until documents surfaced confirming Anne-Sophie's achievement. So, have you ever broken any rules? Tell us about it in the comments section below. And don't forget to subscribe my channel Boring History Club so you never miss another video.